Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Poetry at Midday, Poesia o Meio Dia, organized by the Chair of Irish Studies, and then joining the 16th Symposium of Irish Studies in South America. It is our pleasure to create this synergy with the symposium, and today we have the great pleasure to introduce you to Rachel Fitzpatrick, the Deputy Consul General of the Consulate General of Ireland in São Paulo. And we would like to give her a big welcome, a very heartfelt welcome, because she is taking this post on place of Jill Henneberry, who has been with us for nearly 4 years together, and now she was promoted, and Rachel is coming to stay with us. So I hope, Rachel, you will have a wonderful stay with all these Irish studies scholars and people interested in Ireland, and we wish you a great success and an enriching experience, bringing also to us. Thank you very much, and I will just leave the screen. I pass it over to you to present our honorable guest speakers.
Thank you ever so much, Professor Zara. Thank you, Laura, for the kind introduction. Am I audible?
You are.
Brilliant. My name is Rachel Fitzpatrick. I'm the Deputy Consul General here in Sao Paulo. And as Laura said, I have arrived very recently, August of this year. And one of the things that first struck me is the really deep connection that Brazilians hold to Ireland and to Irish culture. And so much of this is thanks to the efforts and to the commitment and to the passion of our friends online today. For over 30 years, ABE and its associated institutions have been promoting Irish literature. They've been creating really deep links between Ireland and Brazil, and they've been facilitating an extremely rich study environment where students really have unrivaled opportunities to connect with the great writers and thinkers of Ireland, to explore also what their work means in a Brazilian context. And I think this has in turn enriched our own understanding of Ireland and what Irish studies means and how it's evolving across the world. For 12 years now, the Department of Foreign Affairs has had the absolute pleasure of supporting the W.B. Yeats Chair at the University of Sao Paulo, and we are extremely proud to partner with this Centre of Academic Excellence, which fosters a love of Irish studies through its high-quality courses, seminars, roundtables, and exchanges. And we've also been delighted to partner with ABE for some time. And I must say, I have been so impressed in my short time here with how they are empowering a younger generation of Brazilian academics all over the country. They're really showcasing the best of classic and contemporary writers. So allow me once again to thank the organizers and all participants of this symposium. As colleagues have been discussing over the last 3 days, it's an important centenary year for Ireland, in which we are reflecting on the events of the last century, which have shaped our country politically and socially. As a nation, we continue to reflect on the meaning of and the complex narratives surrounding statehood and independence. And I feel this symposium has really brought to life a lot of these debates, in particular in the cultural space. And these debates are enriched due to the commonalities and indeed the many differences that are being considered in the context of Brazil's bicentenary. I've really enjoyed all of the discussions I've been observing, especially one this morning, Mariamo de Barros, opening my mind with her insights as to how nationalism constructs womanhood and vice versa. The online symposium is really wonderful in that it allows for the participation of so many experts that we would not otherwise have available to us. But I must say, one of the things I do miss about being in person is having the opportunity to discuss and debate the themes in the margins, to respectfully disagree with one another. So I hope that next year the public health situation will allow us to do that. But more than enough about me. I have the pleasure to introduce two marvelous women for a session that I have really been looking forward to. Susan Lennon-Hoy has studied discourse and theatre at the London School of Music and English Literature at the National University of Ireland, I have had the joy of getting to know Susan in recent weeks, including learning more about the role she has played promoting Irish culture and in particular Irish poetry in Brazil. Susan is Embaixatriz da Irlanda and lives in Brasilia. Joining us, I believe, from County Kildare, Mary, if that's right, is one of Ireland's best known and most loved contemporary authors, Mary O'Donnell. Mary is a writer of poetry and prose. She is a journalist, a teacher, and a mentor. Her poetry collections include Unlegendary Heroes, September Elegies, and Those April Fevers. An 8th collection, Massacre of the Birds, was recently published. 4 novels include Where They Lie and a best-selling debut, The Light Makers, and her collection of short stories, Empire, was published in 2018. Mary is a member of Ace Donna. She has judged the International Impact Award and Hennessy Literary Award, amongst numerous others. She has taught creative writing at Carlow University, Pittsburgh, University of Iowa, Trinity College, and elsewhere, and has been recently awarded a PhD from UCC. Mary's work has been translated into Brazilian Portuguese, and she is known and loved here, including from her time as a visiting lecturer at USP, I believe in 2019. When I arrived here several weeks ago, it was actually Mary's words that I'd heard on the radio several weeks previously, which were echoing in my head as I gazed out, completely terrified, from a 20th floor balcony at the metropolis before me. If I may quote Mary, hopefully correctly, Sao Paulo is not beautiful at all. It is so much more than that. It is an experience that demands a little personal recalibration because it retains the mystery of an expressionist painting flecked with the color and texture to which one is forced to return to really see it. And Mary, I hope you do return very soon. We are really looking forward to welcoming you. This afternoon, we'll be reading and thinking about the theme of motherhood, among many others. It's an area very thoughtfully explored in Mary's work, which, in my view anyway, critically examines the institutionalization of motherhood. And before her, these ideas were examined by other Irish greats. So we will therefore start with Susan, who will be reading and speaking to the work of Yeats. And after that, Mary will read 4 poems to us, which she can introduce. So sorry for speaking for so long. And without further ado, I do have the pleasure to hand over to my friend Susan.
Hello everyone, how are you doing? I am delighted to be back here in sunny Brazil after my time in Ireland during the summer. And I'm also very honoured to be part of this symposium here, the Symposium of Irish Studies, and further honoured to share the forum with our distinguished poet Mary O'Donnell. I'm delighted she's able to be here today with us. First of all, Mary, I met her when she was here in Brazil, and I was telling her that I remember as a young married woman back in the 90s, expecting my first baby, when her wonderful poem or book, The Light Makers, was released. And I read that and it made a big impact on me. And I realized, you know, how wonderful it was to have a woman in those days who could highlight, you know, the different ways that women were treated in Irish society, the gender stereotyping and the injustices basically of society in Ireland at that time. And many of these injustices have continued, as we know. So I was delighted to see that it was re-released a couple of years ago. So it's definitely a book that's worth rereading. And if you haven't read it yet, do go and get it. And because the issues it raises are just as relevant today as they were during that time. So then recently I picked up Massacre of the Birds, which is beautiful, beautiful book of poetry, and I enjoyed every single one of the poems, Mary. And I see that it's no wonder she's such an accomplished poet, because the subjects she touches are brave and bold and amazing, as well as everything. But I was particularly struck by, you know, the poems regarding motherhood and the experiences of mothers, and how we treat mothers in our society, which, as we know, Ireland had a lot a lot of problems doing. Especially when I was at home in Ireland, I was, caring for my own mother. And because I had been talking a lot about Yeats and visiting Sligo a lot, I began to think, well, I wonder what was the relationship with Yeats and his mother. And of course, at that time, it wasn't probably fashionable or profitable, as was once said, to, have a relationship with one's mother out in the open. So we don't find that many references to her. Her name was Susan Pollux then, and she was from Sligo herself. And she thought she was marrying a barrister. Yeats' father was a barrister, but then he had his own artistic leanings. So she actually lived quite a sad and lonely life, from what I can gather. And in the end, she went into a deep depression and didn't get that much feedback, I'd say, from her sons, although her absolute love of Irish landscape and Sligo and the fables and the folklore were transferred, obviously, to both WB and Jack, as they show in both their poems and their paintings. But sadly, she died in 1900 on her birthday, January the 1st, 1900, at the ripe old age of 59. And when she died, Yeats was quoted as saying, "It has, of course, been inevitable for a long time, and it's long since my mother has been able to recognize any of us, except with difficulty." Very sad. When I was looking through, and maybe some of you know better than me, but when I was looking through Yeats's poetry, I didn't, as I say, find that much direct reference to motherhood in regards to his relationship with his own mother. But I did find the poem, The Song of the Old Mother, which I remember from my childhood when I used to flick through books of Yeats's poetry. And I also find it's interesting that, Yeats chose as the mother, he was only in his 30s when he wrote it, and yet he chooses this mother as a personification of the process of aging and the terrible life people have when they get old, and that life is over and it's all gloom and doom. And I find myself reading the poem today, and although it's the mother is moaning about her children who are lying in bed, and I suppose any of us mothers who have teenagers or children know how much we do moan about that. Where they're cooking and cleaning and washing and cleaning up after them with very little thanks or gratitude. And and of course, Sally Rooney, who is the flavour of the month. There's no such thing as having a debate about Irish literature now, I think, without mentioning Sally Rooney, who, by the way, is from County Mayo, where I come from myself. But she, even in her latest book, the mother there says, "Oh, how did I come to rear such selfish children?" Not that my children are selfish, of course, but I'm going to go on and say the poem for you now without a bit much more ado. So it's called The Song of the Old Mother, an early poem, quite part of Yeats's 19th century writing. The Song of the Old Mother. I rise in the dawn and I kneel and blow till the seed of the fire flicker and glow. And then I must scrub and bake and sweep till stars are beginning to blink and peep. But the young lie long and dream in their bed of the matching of ribbons, the blue and the red. And their day goes over in idleness. And they sigh if the wind but lift up a tress, while I must work, because I am old, and the seed of the fire gets feeble and cold. Turning over to you, Mary, I know that you have some wonderful poems about motherhood and many other issues, and I hope you're going to surrender some of them now, and I know you will.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this, and to Laura also. Gosh, what a great reading that was, Susan. You reminded me of Siobhan McKenna, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. Really, that sort of, you have a theatrical, wonderful way of reading. Thank you. This one, I'm going to read two poems about my late mother, and she had sort of been diagnosed with dementia, but you know, she didn't really. She just had memory loss and some things blanked out, that's all. But as she grew older, she went to an A school, as I did, the St. Louis Convent in Monaghan, which means, for the Brazilian, anybody watching who isn't Irish, that we learned our subjects through Irish at school. So this one is called My Mother Remembers Her Irish. Like Alice, she has fallen down the rabbit hole. In a room at the bottom, rejecting a bottle labelled "Drink Me," she reaches for the cracked urn of language. Speak me, it invites. White hair in disarray, she unstops it. The contents fizz up and over the lip of glaze as she recovers the sounds she forgot after schooling. Now she has broken away from the language bunker, its torqued English, takes to speech at the midnight hour. As if fighting the Jabberwocky, she uses old songs to push against a paralysis of chair lifts, walking frames. They emerge on her tongue, ancient oratorio. Síalta, be éach amárach, Cadúirt tú a chalín álín, Bhuaitlam de la Walla. Such softness that rarely found its way in English now honeys her tongue in the magical flight of dotage. Time, released, enriches conversation. Did you know that this republic was born 70 years ago today? Years after the Maloccos in the town taught me Mussolini's anthem. We speak of Easter music, the St. Matthew Passion, her Ceol Croifach. She wonders if the sun will dance Easter Sunday morning on the hill above her house at Kilnadrain, where she wants to return sometime soon. Mohinton Fain, she adds. And I probably should have said it before I began this poem, but those of you who have read Alice in Wonderland will have recognized some of those images of, you know, drink me and speak me when Alice falls down the well. And then the Jabberwocky, whom Alice also confronts. And in order to read the Jabberwocky's poem, it can only be read in a mirror. So I was really getting ending of experience that I think occurs as our memory sieve starts to fail us a little or open something else. Now the next one, and you see, I became increasingly interested in the mother-daughter relationship, especially as I, as an older daughter, was caring for my mother a great deal. And so the relationship becomes very different some of the time. And this one is called My Mother Says No on Bloomsday 2020. It is not easy to wheel an old woman to the shower on Bloomsday when the world and Molly cry, yes, 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 and she is saying, no, 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 because what's left of her life depends on the freedom of no. How Joycean of her to resist the cleaned up conscience of filial attention, your need to fix her taints and odours, wash hair and teeth, attend to toes, when all she wants is to float on the lily leaf of her own green bedspread, drowsing Molly in a tangle of snow-white hair. Now, dreams enclose her more than talk of showers or meals. The flowing waters of memory rise and touch her skin just where the mattress eases spine and bones in that yellow-walled room. Hello, my darling, she greets his photograph, flinging kisses towards mottled frame. To her, then, the logic of love. To her, the logic of no, her tongue untamable. And I'll move sideways now, probably back maybe more into my own world. I'm a canal walker. I like to walk near water. And I do like the idea of mirror images very much and what they can throw up. So this one is called Hanging House in a Canal. It lay on the other side, the colour of country butter. I longed to enter any way I could, by door, window, chimney. Found it locked. But there was a reflection, clear as a mirror in the still waters, the raised brows of dormer windows as it hung there, upside down, the poking nose of the porch, the comforting torso of walls. I stripped off, knew immediately what to do, dived, entered that beckoning house, its bubbling whispers an embrace as I burst through its porch reflection. Now, within, I am drowning in secrets, in the company of rats, diving herons, grey roach and crayfish, with my own, as always. My final poem is called Missing Brazil, and as Susan and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the Vice Consul's name, forgive me, but as you rightly remarked, I did find that my initial impression of Sao Paulo was, people often talk about the beauty of cities. Oh, it's fabulous, it's beautiful, you have to see it. But it's not like that in Sao Paulo. You have to see it, but it's for other reasons. And I found it, an utterly compelling city that I still feel I've only put a toe into. And of course, as I don't speak Portuguese, if you don't have the language, you're missing something very major in understanding anything. But I did my best. And I did miss Brazil. It was challenging, it was wonderful, and I do want to come back again. But this next time I'll probably bring my husband and we'll head off. So, missing Brazil. I will not head for Brazil again, fly over those steaming kettle clouds in a plane nosing south of the equator, passing Rio, over sand-furred blonde beaches, nor see the cloud-scraping apartments of Sao Paulo, or drive past the politician's high compound. I will not walk through Cracolandia, witness tiny women with thin scarves wrapped around acorn breasts who sell themselves to anyone. People sprawled beneath a canopy of ficus trees as the daytime world rustles, hustles, and they rest with watchful shut eyes. Street corners, cafes, the smolder of thick coffee as I drift. Shops where women consider skirt lengths and décolletage. My life a half-ignited flame treated like a casual gift. Fallen fruits from a clown fig tree remind me. dust on streets, couples tucked limb on benches in broad parks, those green-lit awnings overhanging a restaurant where I ate alone during a torrential storm. I photographed the empty chair opposite, sent it home. Not lonely, just alone, and everything richer than before, ablaze in the rain. Now I mourn. Those days are gone. I will not drift again beneath steaming kettle clouds, never travel so far again, learn so much, so little. Thank you for listening. And I think now, Rachel, do I hand over to...
If I may, just first of all, thank you both for really beautiful and thought-provoking readings. Just gorgeous. And I'll try and hold back the emotion I'm experiencing to exercise the chair's privilege to ask the first question, if I may. And in the meantime, we would encourage viewers to please put their comments in the chat box so that we can pose them to Mary or to Susan. I'd like to ask Mary, if I may, about your recent collection, which, as Susan has said, explores a number of very somber themes and challenges of our time. You know, the destruction of the natural world, the plight of refugees, direct provision, gender inequality. One poem on the Me Too movement lists successive violations against women, and another, It Wasn't a Woman, details further instances of sexual violence committed against women, those that are kind of publicly documented in the press as opposed to more private ones. And personally, I found some of it quite difficult to read, you know, which is the point of art, to spark in us complex emotions. And sometimes the world does feel a bit hopeless. But what I'd like to know is in your writing and personally, how do you strike a balance between shedding light on these crises, offering such radical empathy, and also demanding action from society? I find it's done so perfectly, and I'd like to know a bit more about that.
I'm not really sure that I actually strike a balance, Rachel. It's just that every so often, you know, say, for example, the poem It Wasn't a Woman, which is an inventory of male violence against women. And, you know, these things they're reported in newspapers. And then the inspiration for that poem came when I just had a kind of a collision of all these things in my head one night. And I thought, you know, these things are reported as if they were, all right, reportage, and they are meant to illustrate something. But it is actually shocking. And it was my own sense of shock at the build-up of incidents I've either observed or read about and seen documented. And that made me feel I have to write this poem, this particular one. And of course, I know for many readers that's in contrast, for example, between, all right, there's the Mary O'Donnell who will write that, but maybe there's also the Mary O'Donnell who will write about a heron in flight or something like that. And there actually isn't any balance. I think it's just my experience, which, as I often say, we can't shop for our experience. We can just deal with what we encounter and respond to it, perhaps. I hope that answers your question.
No, thank you. It does. And it certainly motivates me anyway to stand up to inequality. Sorry, Susan, please go ahead.
I would just like to say as well that that particular poem, which, as some people may not know, as you said, it's a whole list of the violent acts carried out against women. And then it's so contrasting, Mary, with your other poem, which is the list of women doing ordinary, everyday, small things, frying burgers, you know, taking the kid to creche. And like the contrast between the two of them is just so stark that it's like, you know, it's to me, that contrast was like highly effective. Did you do that?
I didn't do that consciously, actually.
Yeah.
That poem you're referring to, which is called Finding Our Place, Heroic, is it's an updated poem to an earlier one published in 1998 called Unlegendary Heroes, in which I documented the lives of, I'll call them labouring, working, ordinary Irish women in the 1930s. And in this one, I wanted to imagine how it is now for women. And of course, it's a very different Ireland. I'm not saying it's better or worse. It's still demanding, but it's different. And that was my point. And those are probably my more political poems, perhaps. And the Ireland reflected in this, the poem you refer to, Our Place Heroic, it's a diverse place now. It's not white Irish people. It's not just straight people. And so,
yeah, it's very interesting because it also portrays the lives of women as like so heroic, but also quite ordinary, you know. And, you know, to see, I've never seen such things spoken about a man. You know, he puts on his socks, he like takes the kids to school, you know, all those things that like are kind of associated with women's roles and that we accept, you know.
Yes, I think I was focusing, I'm interested in that idea of the ordinary heroic, you know, that we all do. It's just called getting on with life. So, you know, and you don't know what's going on behind the surface, or sometimes what an effort it takes to just do the ordinary thing, which is often a very brave thing, maybe for some people with very little money or all that sort of stuff. And of course it can be fantastic as well, but it's an attempt to just reflect the rainbow of circumstance, perhaps, and the things that we rise above to get out there. I'm at risk of sounding like Leo Varadkar, but that's not what I do.
As we ask the audience to put any other questions they might have in the chat box, I might ask one more, Mary, about My Mother Says No on Bloomsday, which is so beautifully read to us. I find it to be such a powerful exploration of, you know, whether the narrator's mother's reluctance to accept the situation might not be her retreating from life, but more embracing it. And the last year and a half of this pandemic has seen so many families grappling with these forms of bodily helplessness, and I think in particular women in caring roles. How do you see that we can maintain dignity and better recognize like the human status of these aging bodies or these unwell bodies, and how can we ensure that feminism plays into this?
I think feminism probably does play into it, actually, though it doesn't go by that label. But I don't know. I mean, it's sort of one of those big social questions. My mother chose to stay in her own home. So I encountered a series of really fantastic women from our home place, which is Monaghan. Most of them were fantastic. You know, again, without that sort of help, which is hard to come by. It's actually the problem is, you know, getting enough. When someone becomes really incapacitated, you need a lot of muscle power and lots of people, and they're not always available without private care, you know. So, I mean, that is a big national question. The way I think of it is, I don't think we are really civilized as nations until we honor the very young and the very old and treat them properly. Those at both ends. The rest of us can more or less manage, more or less.
Those are definitely sentiments to consider as we reflect on 100 years of statehood, I think. Thank you. Sorry, Susan, I've interrupted you again.
No, I was just going to say that, you know, again, I've had the experience of looking after my mum, and especially the pandemic has been so, you know, desperately sad on her, because things that kept her young, her bridge, her friends, driving her car, they're all gone now. And also as a family, we discouraged because we were so afraid for her. So I also feel guilty about that she spent the year and a half at home, and now she's kind of like not leaving. And yes, we don't want her to leave, but we don't want to take away that freedom, you know, and it's so awful. You know, the pandemic has made that kind of thing so much more difficult on families. And, you know, but my mom is still well able to tell me exactly what to do and to put me in my place as well. So good for her.
Yeah. I think you have to go out, you know, with all flames burning.
Absolutely.
Regardless of what your daughter or your son feel. I do see that very much now, though I didn't always when my mother was alive. But it's, you know, we have to be as free as we can be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even if our bodies are wrecks. Anyway.
Yes, there is a comment also from Jessica Grant who really thanks you, Mary, for your poem, because she there it is. She has been profoundly taken because she's taking care of her grandmother. And there she says, with delirium episodes, and wondering a lot of how she makes sense of her own life in these moments.
Hi, Jessica. It's lovely to hear from you again. And I remember you and your writing very well. Yeah, I you know, the poet Mary Dorsey also cared for her mother, and she spoke to me about this thing of memory. And I'm very interested in memory, particularly in my fiction. And she said a thing which helped me. And she said, you know, it's a question of maybe rearranging the sequencing. The sequencing is different. And once you accept that, it helps a lot. And it does. And it's just a different way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
Tem mais comentário aí da Jéssica dialogando com Mary, e você coloca isso. If you want to read, Mary, on your own.
Sorry, pardon?
If you want to read it on your own or just aloud, yes,
Mary,
the comment.
About how it was for you to observe your mother and then reflect about it in poetry. This aspect of how in old age we return to the language and songs of our first years. And that is so true. Again, it's the sequencing, you know. And these, you know, I think experiences like these lend themselves very well to poetry, which, you know, poetry will not, either thematically or structurally, sometimes it will not follow conventional expectations. And to come back to you read a poem from Yeats's early years, Susan, but when you look at what he did as he went on to the other collections, you know, he was constantly resequencing and rewriting, whether it was the format or the structure of the poems or the themes. It was all movement the whole time. And I think that's maybe how it is, you know. If we must move or else we will freeze, you know.
Yes, she regrets because she says people just looking that.
Yes, I see this now.
Bad. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And coming back to the ordinary heroic, as you have mentioned, and Susan raised in her first question to you, it's interesting because you brought up all this ordinary life, as you said, but then you detain very with a lot of details in the selection of the words, in the way you describe it. You bring color to your words. I know that you are passionate for landscapes and for water, but we listen that when we are reading and when you were reading from your own poem. So what do you do, for example, when you face the white page, as all writers have to write the first verses on that page? What is it that comes to you? Is it something that you perceive and you keep this in mind, the idea, or it's something very sudden that made you start your creative process with your pen and the page?
I think sometimes it's something very small, Lara, you know. I might see something and just, you know, I forget about it, but then it will come back and it tends to nibble at the brain a little bit. And suddenly I realized, you know, maybe this could be a poem, for example. And once I'm sure it's a poem and not a piece of fiction, which is a different creature altogether. I don't know, like I'll take for example a poem such as The Little Waves Like Judgments. I wrote this after I was on the island of Gotland in 2015. I was on a residency there, and the Swedes had accepted their first groups of Syrians onto the island. And now what prompted the poem was I was out walking and I saw this group of young men walking towards the town. And they were playing Arabic, Middle Eastern music, and but they looked like, you know, cool teenagers anywhere, and I knew that they were made very welcome. The Syrians were made very welcome on Gotland, all right, and people were actually saying welcome to Sweden. And so at that, I don't know what it's like now, but at that point, it seemed very helpful to people who have undergone an enormous, not just physical, geographical displacement, but I think probably quite a trauma as well. And I was walking beside the sea, and the lapping waves contributed to the title, The Little Waves Like Judgments. So it's just an idea walks into your head sometimes, and you know, it depends on many things, including physical energy, to be honest. You know, if the energy's not there, if you've no petrol in the tank, nothing much is going to happen apart from notes. That's what I find now. So I make notes if I'm too tired.
Right. And then you mentioned prose, and you are a very good fiction writer also. Do you feel split with your mind or with your feelings at the moment that you have to decide this is good for prose or this is good for a poem, or if sometimes the topic is for both, and then how do you do that?
I think I heard recently, I visited Robert Graves's house in Mallorca recently, and then I was reading about him, and he described himself as a poet all his life, and then he wrote fiction about things that interested him, which seems sort of, now I have more mental commitment to fiction than that. But of course he wrote I, Claudius, you know, which is amazing. But no, I'm just either in a fiction mode or not. I'm writing no poetry at the moment, but I did in the spring. And I'm back working on a novel, which I began in February last year. And my agent is not quite happy with it yet. So I have to address a particular section in it. And that's where my head is at the moment, really. So, but it's a different experience altogether for me, writing fiction. But it's hard to describe how. I think of it as, and yet it's not the right word. I think of it as something more muscular, or it's like maybe a big mural on a wall, and there's always some little bit of trouble going on in the corner down there that you have to sort out. Whereas with a poem, it might be, you can just keep coming back to it again and again, and it's shorter.
A very evocative way to describe it. No, that very clearly describes it to me anyway. We have a couple more questions in the chat box, if you don't mind, Mary. The first is from Ada, who asks, would you like to comment a little about inheriting memories and creatively writing on them?
Hi, Ada. Inheriting memories and creatively writing. Yeah, I guess at this stage of some of our lives anyway, we all have quite a bunker of memories. Personally, I only write about the ones that feel urgent and that create some kind of either an agitation or an anxiety or maybe even a pleasure. There are some that just never rise sufficiently to have any effect on me, though I have the memories. So, but probably any work of memory is, not any, but some works of memory are worthwhile chronicles of something, a time, a place, a mood. And that is, I think that's why we do it, Ada, just speaking to you directly. You know, I know you've written a novel yourself, and so I know you're very familiar with this process.
Thank you, Miriam. We've one further question from Gisele. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation of all the names. How do you view readership in contemporaneity? Is there space for writing in the digital era, writing poetry, or do we run the risk of going back to oral poetry exclusively?
Could I see that question again? Just can you flash it up again? Well, yeah, readership, readership of most poetry is very, very low, Giselle. So I don't know, but I think there is space. I think there will always be space for writing in the digital era, but I'm not, I'm really not sure. People do still seem to want to read. If you go into any bookshop and there are walls of books, literal walls of fiction. So it is still happening. But I certainly welcome the Kindle and things like that. And I'm very interested to see how reading will come to us in the future. I suspect it will come maybe holographically or something like that on our hands maybe, or something. I'm not sure. But read, I think we probably will. I hope that answers it.
If there are no further questions from those online, we do have more beauty to share with you all this afternoon. I can hand over to Susan to introduce this a little bit, but in its first week, this single hit #1 in the official homegrown charts and was the first female act to ever do so during lockdown of last year. Many of you will have heard and have been moved by it, and it has a brilliant story as well in terms of the funds that were raised for excellent organizations. I can let Susan speak to that, but before we conclude, I just wanted to thank you once again, Mary, for your contribution today and indeed over the last number of decades. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rick and Susan, very much, and Lara.
We're so delighted to have you here today, Mary. Thank you so much. It was such an interesting session. And it's lovely to have somebody in from Ireland, to add to this. It's really great. And thank you very, very much for responding to the invitation so easily and quickly and generously. So what I really want to do then is to just introduce to you this collection of successful female artists, including Moya Brennan from Clannad and Imelda May and many other young up-and-coming Irish singers and artists. And during lockdown, they got together and they made this video to try and raise some money for Safe Ireland, which is an organisation in Ireland which helps women and children living in crisis. And they chose to perform one of my favourite songs, Dreams, which is written by Dolores O'Riordan, herself a poet who unfortunately is no longer with us, and her guitarist from the Cranberries. So we're going to leave you with that today. Thank you so much for joining in with us. And we hope you enjoyed our session and we hope you enjoyed this piece of music. So until next time, goodbye from us all here.
It's changing every day in every possible way. And all my dreams, it's never quite as it seems, never quite as it seems. I know I felt like this before. 'cause it came from you. Then I open up and see the person falling here is me. A different way to be. I want more. Impossible to ignore. Impossible to ignore. And they'll come true. Impossible not to do. Impossible not to do.